Hey, what's going on, guys? It's VenomousFatman here. I'm here on the BITT, the boys in the tube, and right now I got a very special guest with me. I'm hanging out with Richie Branson. You guys may have heard him if you watch Toonami every Saturday night now that it's back. Toonami's back, bitches. So, Richie, welcome. What's going on?
Oh man, I'm good, man. I'm just eating this good barbecue, Saturday night,
Mm-hmm.
getting ready for Tommy, it's going down.
It's going down, man. We're gonna try to get this out before Toonami tonight, so everybody's got a little something to kind of, listen in on during the commercials. So it should be pretty cool.
No, no, let's do
All
it.
right, so let's get kick right things off with this. Let's begin. Let's go back to the beginning because we're going to talk about everything involving you. We're going to talk about your music. We're going to talk about anime. We're going to talk about games. We're going to talk about all that stuff. But let's go back to square one. Let's start off with Richie Branson, the person. So, what was the beginning for you? And kind of like your introduction into anime, into music, into gaming. What was that specifically? What was the, Richie Branson year one?
Well, year one, I'd say we got to go all the way back to when my granddad had got me a Super Nintendo, man. That's how it all started. Got me a Super NES, as a young kid. I remember, it seemed like out of nowhere. I was just playing video games. I had King Griffey baseball. I mean, I don't know. I was glad I got a Super Nintendo, man, but it was the bundle that had King Griffey baseball, and that just wasn't really my cup of tea. So I went out, and the first game I thought to get was the Link to the Past, the Legend of Zelda that came out on Super NES,
Nice.
and it was because it was bundled with it was another bundle game, and it was really the one I wanted just because it looked cooler than King Griffey baseball. But at that time, I never really understood the magnitude of what the Zelda game was like. So when I got it, I played it, and I was instantly hooked. The whole Japanese games and how epic they were, and the story-driven gameplay that they featured. It was just a huge. It was something I admired greatly. So I started playing more games like that. So I got into Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and that all became a part of my gaming history, all the way from 16 bits to the PlayStation 3. Man, I've always been into a lot of those video games that lengthy, role playing games where you really just have to pay attention to the story, and it's just always been a part of my thing. As far as anime goes, I got into that in like eighth grade, ninth grade. Toonami was out. I remember catching it one day after school. I came home and I caught an episode of Dragon Ball Z. I still remember
Yeah.
specifically.
There you go.
It was the episode where what was that dude's name? Nappa. When Vegeta and Nappa
Oh, the
were
Saiyan saga, the beginning.
yeah, the saga. Nappa just threw those two fingers up and like blew shit up, and I was like, yeah, this shit is ill. So that's how I kind of got into that, man. And what really drew me to anime was it was a far different experience from any other cartoon. Because I've always been a big cartoon watcher, but what really drew me to anime was the story based elements where you had to stick around for the next episode. Like it wasn't just, oh, I'm watching this episode, and tomorrow I get to watch a completely different event. It was you got to stay on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned. What's Vegeta gonna do next? Is he gonna beat Goku, or is Goku's Spirit Bomb gonna finally go off? What's gonna happen? So I really ended up getting hooked to anime for that very reason because it was more of a serial uh, soap opera almost element to it.
Hmm.
Just, looking back at media history, if you look back in the 30s when those radio serials were out and kids were listening to the radio shows and staying tuned for the next broadcast, like anime really brought that back as far as, kids growing up and having stories that they can continue to watch and stay on the edge of their seat.
That's pretty cool. So let's go a little bit back to the gaming's part a little bit because you said you got a Super Nintendo. Now I know for a fact because I've done a bunch of reading on your website, which by the way, RichieBranson.com. I did a whole bunch of reading on your website, and Super Nintendo wasn't the only thing that you really played. I mean, you've ended up playing a whole bunch of RPGs on Super Nintendo. You also picked up some Sega Genesis games. Like now, was the Super Nintendo, was that your only specific system? And if so, or if not, did you play it mostly solo, or did you actually get into it with friends and such?
Well, to be honest, I also had the Sega Genesis. I was one of those kids who happened to have both consoles. The Sega I actually bought, I think, on my own money. It was something I saved up and got. And ended up getting some games for Christmas from my mom. I got Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Streets of Rage, and
Yeah, there we
you know,
go.
Sega to me had a lot of good action games. Like I got on the Super Nintendo for my RPG fix, and the Sega was more for my action games, those beat 'em ups, and also like the platformers. Like Sonic was just that was my shit, man.
That was the beginning for
Sonic,
me.
yeah, Sonic is awesome, man. I wish when they released Sonic Generations, and I've been playing that, and that was such a good thing to do for Sonic the Hedgehog fans to bring that 2D platforming gameplay back. So,
Yeah.
yo, love. And eventually, I went from consoles, and I ended up being more of a PC gamer in my latter years. Like I was a big Half-Life player. I got into EverQuest, played a lot of multiplayer, massively multiplayer games. So I was getting into those, playing what else? World of Warcraft. I did that. Star Wars Galaxies. So I love the multiplayer gaming as well. That's one of the pillars of my video game mantra, if you will.
That's pretty cool. Me and you are gonna have to hit up the Marvel MMO when it comes out later this year because since you're big into MMOs, there's a lot of real good ones coming out real soon that you're gonna get a kick out of. So
The
that's
Marvel one looks
that should be pretty cool. So besides that though, you mentioned action games for your Sega Genesis. Do you ever play like games like Vector Man or Beyond Oasis or any of those other like really kind of like big name games for the Sega Genesis back in the day?
Vector Man was pretty cool. I really liked Vector Man. It had a different style to it. Some of the other games I liked on the Sega Genesis, Altered Beast.
Oh yeah.
Altered Beast was the truth, man. I really liked that game. Of course, like I said, I'll say it a million times. Streets of Rage was a very awesome series, man. Like played all the Streets of Rage games. Uh, Very good. I also like some of the. I tended to play a lot of more of the cross-platform games that the multi-platform releases on Sega too, like Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition.
Mhm.
Some of the fighting games that ended up coming out on Sega. And Super Nintendo. I always bought the Sega version because they had like less censorship. Like Super Nintendo seemed to like love censoring games, like Mortal Kombat.
Perfect
I got it.
example.
Also, Primal Rage. I like the uncensored Sega Genesis version more so than the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, getting away from games for a little bit, let's talk a little bit about music because obviously you're an artist. You've done plenty of tracks. You've worked with some big name artists, in a couple different projects. Tell us how the whole music thing kind of really got started and where did it like, what was the point where it really kind of took off where you're working with people like Rick Ross and such like that?
Well, it all started many, many years ago. I was in high school. Um, I was this awkward, dirty kid, but somehow I managed to find my place among the cool kids. There was a group that used to freestyle rap outside, and or in the lunchroom or what have you. And somehow I ended up being the guy that would take the pen and beat on the table and make the beats for the guys freestyling. And I guess people told me, hey, you're really good at making those pencil beats, man. You should make beats for real. So for my 16th birthday, I got a beat machine. Well, it was more software. I called it a beat machine then, but it was really just Magic's Music Maker. And I started making beats on my computer. At first, I was pretty shy about it. I would lie and say that Timbaland made the beats just to see what people thought. And somehow people really believe that Timbaland made those crappy things. I don't know why. Like, yo, Timbaland's coming out with some new shit. This is dope, man. And so eventually, yeah, I started making beats for rappers. And I went to college at University of Houston and linked up with some people. And it was pretty cool. I ended up having to move back home. I dropped out of school to move back because my mom ended up getting breast cancer. So I kind of came back to help her out, and I got a job, started working. But the love for music never went away. I still made beats, but it was more on an amateur basis. My cousin was making beats for an artist out in Prairie View University named Bone, and we ended up working on a mixtape for him. And he actually auditioned in front of L.A. Reid with a couple of songs that me and my cousin had produced, and L.A. Reid signed him on the spot. One of those songs ended up charting on Billboard, so we ended up getting a good amount of exposure as producers behind that song that we produced for Def Jam. And I ended up writing another song. I wrote the hook for a song that released under Def Jam not too long after that. And from there, I worked with a few other artists, signed with Jive under Sony, um, and of course Def Jam through Rick Ross and them as well. And also Soldier Boy's label, I did some work over there at Interscope with one of their artists on a DJ Smalls mixtape, and I really managed to get a good experience producing mainstream music. And it wasn't long before I was like, yo, I want to rap too, man. These guys get paid a lot of money.
True.
So I started rapping. Sucked at it. The rap thing started 2 years ago. So I've been rapping for a little under 2 years, actually. It's been about a year and 10 months. Really sucked at it. I tried to go the mainstream route and ended up getting a little situation, a recording deal, actually, with one of the executives up at Universal Republic. And Universal Republic is a pretty big label. Young Money's up there, Drake, Nicki Minaj, and them. So it's an executive out there who has his own label called Two Tone Entertainment, and he flew me up, and we developed a working relationship around me rapping. Um, I recorded a song called Jersey Shore Pump. It was meant to be for fun. I was just kind of making fun of the whole, party scene, Jersey
Yeah.
Shore, just having fun, man. And we ended up shooting a video on the shore, and it was cool. It's definitely a far cry from the music I'm making now, but it did its thing. But I found that I wasn't too into it. I wasn't promoting it. I wasn't really about that kind of lifestyle. So in January, I decided I was going to just start rapping about things I like. Video games and anime being big passions of mine, and just all the nerdy things that represent me. Because truth be told, I'm just a big nerd, man. I'm not really anything like what a mainstream rapper would be about. I never sold
Hmm.
drugs, do drugs. Not really a big womanizer or anything like that. So I just decided to talk about stuff that best fits me, and it's been a good experience ever since.
So let me ask you this, because you said, at heart you're kind of a nerd, you're kind of a geek, you're into the type of stuff that most of us are into, at least, the people that listen to this podcast or that watch anime and play games and such. So what's it like, personally for you, or how does it really kind of, what's the type of feelings that you get being part of this world where, you have, different things involving hip hop, rap, R&B, and the music world for that matter, but being who you are, that you're not really into like a lot of what the generalized, grouping is into most of the time.
It's funny, because, like I said, I had a lot of mainstream music success through the production and with that record deal with Two Tone the other year. And it's funny because the music I'm making now, it seems that I've gotten way, 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 way much more exposure than I ever did, when I was up there doing the industry thing. I've partied with Michael Jordan, I've gotten drunk with Amber Rose. I've been around like industry people and been around that lifestyle. Yet I've never gotten so much individual exposure as an artist than what I've had doing the music I'm doing, and it's a blessing. Because if I feel like that's actually fate, that fate told me, just be real, be you. And when you authentically do music that you want to do that represents you, you'll get a lot more credit for it. So I feel great.
That's pretty cool. Now, real quickly before we kind of end this part off, did you ever get, because again, like I said, you're into more of kind of like the geek culture, the nerd culture, for that matter, in most of your music, at least more contemporary wise. Did you ever kind of get looked down upon a little bit by others in like the music scene or any other part of the industry, just because basically on what the subject matter of what your music was about?
Well, I'll be honest, like the people that handle all my business, from the music perspective were like, what are you doing? But they see approach. They're like, okay, Richie just completely went from making this kind of music to just going straight into this video game nerd stuff. What is he doing? He's really trying to like mess up his career. But when they started seeing all the press I was getting and seeing the buzz I was generating from it, they were like, all right, he's on to something. And it's good to have those industry connections. I got a lot of executives up in New York that are looking at this whole nerdcore thing now, and the beauty of it is, hopefully it'll help bring more industry exposure to nerdcore. Because as I continue to make this nerd music, and I've got label executives looking in, listening, and all the big head, the big people that are at least looking. They may not be trying to throw money at me, but they're at least looking and saying, "Oh, that's Richie Branson. Oh, okay, that's that producer." it's going to bring exposure to the whole group, so that artists that are doing the same thing as me will also get that shine and get that exposure. I think I don't know if I got looked down per se, but I know a lot of like people in San Antonio, because there's not really a lot of artists in San Antonio that are just making it like that.
Yeah.
And so, realistically speaking, I know I'm getting a lot more exposure than a lot of the local artists here, outside of my team. I got a crew of artists that I work with out here, and they're way better than me, to be honest with you. And they're dope, really dope. But outside of that, I'm definitely, making a lot of major moves happen, in San Antonio that other rappers haven't really gotten a chance to do yet. And I feel like they actually ignore it. It's like they don't want to ever admit that a nerd rapper is getting more press and getting more exposure than they are. So it's kind of funny. It's really kind of funny, man. I can't even lie. But that's life.
Very true. So, last question before we end this part off. Is there any specific artists, popular or otherwise, that you want to work with in the nearby future, or that you're planning on working with in the nearby future?
Really love to work with Lupe Fiasco, XV. Those are two artists that I definitely want to work with, because they actually sort of embody the same philosophy that I do, as far as just being themselves and talking about, their nerdy interests. So, it'd really be cool to do a song with Lupe, to be honest with you. That would be great.
Sounds pretty
That
cool. So anyway, guys, we're going to end this part off. We're going to continue on to part two as I continue to sit down with Richie Branson. Be sure to check out the next part of this interview. Talk to you all in a minute. Stay epic.